You'll know when you have a wild woman. She'll practice her craft without boundaries. She is truly autonomous. Her loyalty is only to the family she serves, a midwife who will not allow herself to be held back by a system she didn't create.
This podcast is for the birth keepers who want to grow and change. We are open to learning through self-reflection and supportive community. We are creating this space to explore without judgment. We are remembering we were
Born wild. Hello, and welcome back to the Born Wild podcast. Today you get to listen to an interview I did of Brooke Radloff. She is a coach and counselor for families going through pregnancy, birth, postpartum, parenthood. She is incredible. She's supported many of my families, and they all rave about her. So enjoy this interview. Okay, hello. Thank you for meeting up with me. It's so convenient.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yep. We can come together at any time.
Yeah.
From anywhere.
Yeah, and you're the first interview I've done where you're not like a family member who's had a home birth with me. I originally had started, interviewing my clients usually around like 6 months, 9 months, just to kind of hear about their experience and reflect. And but you just kept popping in my mind, and you've been like such a blessing to a lot of my clients. And I just thought like it would be so great to do an interview with you and share how you're supporting families in this area. So maybe you could do like a little introduction of who you are, what you do. And
yeah, it's an honor. It's so nice to get to connect in this way too, because it gives us an opportunity to talk with each other. And we've don't get that many opportunities right now, so it's nice to carve it out. But yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit about my background. I've worked in the pregnancy, birth, postpartum, parenthood field for a lot of years. It's I guess a couple decades now, and I started kind of on accident in a sense by attending my first birth of a dear friend when I was 15, and the midwife that delivered that baby and I acted as her doula. The midwife who delivered her baby was the same midwife who had delivered me and when I was born. And it was profound, and it definitely changed my life. And from that point, it was really clear that pregnancy, birth, and kind of helping with that transition through parenthood was going to be interwoven in my life path. And strangely, from that point, people kept asking me to be with them at their births. And I just figured that's what everybody does. Everybody just attends births and supports people in that process. And
so you were the doula, but you weren't you didn't know that title yet or anything?
I didn't know anything I knew midwives, and I grew up in an area where there were a lot of home births. I was born at home, actually. And so I just sort of was very comfortable with birth and very familiar with it. And so, and people wanted me to be with them. So I was, kind of would be with friends or, as a midwifery assistant, like in that kind of role, before I ever knew what a doula was. And so it was probably about 10 years that I was like, at some point, maybe I'll be a midwife. Mm-hmm. But then at a certain point, I realized that, it's a different kind of midwifery that I'm doing, that really helping through this midwife a transition through life. And my life took me in different directions through education. I was always still involved with birth work, but I studied environmental sustainability and became a mediator, and was doing conflict resolution work and nonprofit work and birth work always on the side. And eventually it led me to wanting to go deeper with people of like, why are people having conflict, and what is it that they need to do in order to be healthy and well balanced and kind of mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And that led me to get my master's in psychology. And when I got my master's, I just naturally started focusing on pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and parenthood, and how we can really engage with that whole process to be an opportunity for personal growth and transformation. And, you know, kind of on one side, how can we deal with challenges? How can we deal with anxiety or trauma or fears or anything that comes up in the process, all the way kind of to the other side of the spectrum of we're already going through so much change. Can we engage with this process in a way that we can become something more of ourselves? Can it actually be part of our personal growth path? Like as we're going through the change of pregnancy or the amazing experience of, you know, of birth, whatever that ends up looking like. And then the transition in through parenthood, both postpartum and beyond. And can we kind of take that by the reins and really engage with it as an opportunity for transformation and personal growth? So yeah, so I ended up developing, as I was in my master's program, I also got pregnant.
Oh.
And so it was suddenly, as I was deeply engaged in research and bringing mindfulness into like cognitive psychology and, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy into kind of the somatic realm and cognitive realm and mindfulness about birth and pregnancy and parenthood. And then I got pregnant and had to apply all of it myself. And so I got to really engage in like both sides of the learning all at the same time, kind of in my own laboratory of life and within the container of graduate school at the same time. And it was challenging, and it was everything that I work with other people in. You know, it was, you know, I had extreme nausea and had to use all the mindfulness tools throughout because I would have all night nausea. And
yeah, not just morning sickness.
No, not just morning sickness. And it was like I really got to use the tools that I since now apply with other people. And through the process, I developed and what I call the integral model of pregnancy and childbirth. And it's really approaching the whole experience of pregnancy, birth, postpartum, parenthood as kind of how can you approach this from as many kind of as holistic as possible and as many angles as possible to be able to support a positive birth experience and support personal growth and support like the process from not just a midwifery model or not from a traditional you know, kind of medical model or a psychological model or this or that, kind of like how can we take the best of each of these in order to really thrive, and then apply that to the individual because everyone's different. Right. So I developed this model, and that's kind of the framework that I apply with people, which also really allows me to bring in a lot of different modalities to support as whatever wellness needs to look like for somebody through that process, wellness and
I'm
you know,
sure it adjusts like as they're healing, you know, what they're
absolutely every person's different, what they are going through and how they are navigating this phase of life is different. And so it's really exciting and dynamic. And with one person, you know, they might be dealing with a lot of fear, or they might be dealing with anxiety, and another person might be feeling like this is such an incredible opportunity and I want to engage with it in this particular way. So it can look really different, and in a sense of like there isn't one right way. There's finding the way that is going to support somebody on their path and what they want their experience to be, and hopefully to support it to be what they want, you know, and to kind of align that, because there isn't one way to make a positive, let's just say for birth as example, there isn't one way to make a positive birth experience, but there are a lot of different factors that when you bring them together can influence a much more positive experience.
Yeah.
So
I always tell
yeah.
people like a positive birth story isn't like baby came out your vagina or unmedicated or medicated or belly birth or whatever. It's how you were made to feel and that you were felt heard and you know that your voice mattered and you know that that influences how you feel after more than how your baby came out.
It's a huge part. It's a huge part. When I was doing my graduate research, I did a mixed methods research study that was what makes a birth experience positive. And within that, one element was I surveyed over 500 women on their birth experiences. And it was really profound to hear what made a birth experience positive for people. And it's not all the same, but that element is huge, you know, of actually like, did somebody feel empowered? Did they feel heard? Did they feel like they were in the driver's seat? But also, were they respected? You know, it was that, and as well as, you know, like what pathway did they take through it? A lot of the time, if somebody's expectations are very different than what the reality is, that makes it harder to reconcile, you know, and feel like it was as positive as it is, or as positive as they, you know, were hoping that it would be. But you know, it was incredible to be able to hear so many stories and hear what people experienced. And yet there are certain themes. Not everybody has, you know, it's not the same. There's not one thing, but there are certain themes that really do influence. So that's part of when I'm dealing in pregnancy, and I really do bring that part in of looking at what are all the different elements that come together that are going to support this person to feel strong on the inside, feel flexible for whatever they need to go through, and be resourced to deal with whatever comes their way, mentally, emotionally, physically, you know, even spiritually, kind of like whatever that is.
And the holistic approach too, I mean, like from one of my experiences, you know, I felt fine and emotionally I felt fine. And I can't even remember how long postpartum it was, but I had acupuncture. I was on my belly and they did it down my spine. And my body freaked out, and I like was flashing back to my epidural, my cesarean with my daughter, and like felt like I was passing out and I was all clammy and everything. And it was like, even if like in my brain I recognized like, and I chose the cesarean because of what was going on, and like I rationalized it, but my body was still traumatized, you know, it was still kind of new. And you know, so there's a way that like, you know, the mind body connection is like so strong, and you can't just like heal one and not the other, you know.
Absolutely. It's such a good point, and it's such a good example. I feel like I see that so often, and that's one of the ways that I feel like I really am grateful to have, you know, at least speaking for myself in the way I work, this integrative approach of looking at like what are the different modalities that are going to support somebody. And sometimes, you know, it is very somatic. It is very much body based in terms of the trauma, whether it's physical trauma or if it's just, you know, the memory of it. And that's where it's like being able to bring in kind of somatic release processes, or you know, I really see the effectiveness of emotional freedom technique, of being able to help that move through the body, or, you know, different kinds of somatic mindful awareness to be able to work with that. Or versus, you know, I bring together a lot of different kind of modalities as I'm working with people, depending on what shows up in that way. And, you know, sometimes it's a hypnotherapy, or a cognitive behavioral kind of coaching, sort of the more traditional kind of counseling, and holding space and processing and working through whatever is arising, to the integrative wellness and life coaching, and looking at like, how can we really support your whole person as you are going through this phase of life, and whether it's through the pregnancy or processing birth or preparing for birth, or the transition postpartum, and then as you continue your journey through parenthood, which is, I'm so obviously, so passionate about, because it is such an opportunity to engage in this kind of healing and transformational work.
Yeah. And you and I were talking last time, which is like a big reason why I added on all this extra postpartum support, continue care for the first year, and to have body work and doula work and nutrition, at least in the beginning stages included a bit, because we feel like we want to like raise the bar for everyone to kind of be like, okay, that's baseline, like
I
this
love
is
that.
expected, and anything more is extra. But like to change it that it's not like luxury, like, oh, either if I was really, really struggling, I would do it. Like if I was completely broken, I would do it. Or if I had, a bunch of extra money and it didn't really matter, then I could do it, but like, no, it actually is like something that is just as important, as brushing your teeth and, all the other ways we take care of our bodies,
Yep. I really think of that, in that example of what you're offering, or, kind of as an investment. The truth is like, it's an investment in this particular time period, whether it is pregnancy or it is postpartum and making that transition, or in, the first years of parenthood of like, and really the truth is anytime, in any person, whether it's in, in this phase or not, but it's making that investment now that actually pays off later. It's like, it pays off tenfold if you can actually, we see this of like, if you can actually stay in bed for a couple weeks after you have your baby, that's, it's hard because you want to just get going or you need to do stuff. But if you can actually invest in, whether it's in rest or whether it's in self-care, you won't need to do it in the same way later in order to make up for that.
Right.
And
I see so many
so
times
important
that if you don't, that it can turn into something bigger, like just recently I had a mama who was feeling really poorly, when she had been feeling better and better and better. And I said, well, what did you do yesterday? And they had walked to the park. And she's like a week and a half postpartum. And, I asked her more questions and her bleeding had picked up, but it looked like as the night went on that she was kind of leaning towards mastitis. And we had talked about like how your body communicates to you that that was too much for you. Even if like, and mentally you're like, all I did was go from the bed to the couch. That couldn't be too much. But if your body is saying, actually, it was too much, with your bleeding picking up, all these little signs it tells you. And can you like hear what your body's saying to you and understand it and respect it enough to rest and be able to too? Because there's some moms who are like, I have 4 kids and dad's back to work and like I gotta keep going. And so it's
so
not
true.
like all these postpartum woes we have, like the fact that women are asking, to be sutured or feel they need suturing. It's like, okay, do they actually require sutures to heal? Or are we not respecting postpartum rest enough so that their bodies can just heal naturally like they're meant to? Like,
it's an interesting question.
Like if you were able to just stay in bed and be cared for, would your body just heal? Or do we have to like bring the tissues together so you can get back to your life? And not worry.
It is an interesting question. And it's like, how do we match that with our current modern culture? Of like the reality of like, we don't necessarily live in communal settings where that would be so much more possible if we lived with the grandma and we had the aunties all around and, we had the system in place in order to really allow for that kind of pause to take place in the way that it would be. You'd have to be supported in order to really not need that.
Right. Yeah. Because then it turns out you either, have a bunch of friends and family around who can help out, which not everybody does, or you have the money to spend on postpartum doula care, which not everybody has, it's a tricky spot to be in when we're not in our little villages anymore. Yeah. One thing that popped into my head is I was just flashing back to when we had done the little classes together at Acorn. So plug for
Yeah.
Unicorn Chiropractic.
Yes.
But I was just remembering, you had kind of, whether it's relevant to you or not, I'm not sure with COVID
Hmm.
changes and all that, but my memory is like that there was kind of this like order, this process that you worked through with families who had experienced, I think it was like specifically birth related trauma, and it ended
Hmm.
in like a closing ceremony and all that. And it's just like that closing ceremony really like stood out in my head because I had done a lot of work through birth trauma, but like
Yeah.
never had this. It just felt like there was no closure, you know. But I'm just curious if like when you work with people, I know it just kind of depends on what they need, but is
Hmm.
there like an order of things you kind of do, and is there like a
Yeah.
closure, or is it open ended, or what's it like when
That's
somebody
a really great question. It really depends on kind of how somebody comes in to work with me.
Mhm.
If somebody is, I have a lot of different kind of sort of types of people who are kind of phases that people are in. I have people who are, in their first pregnancy and are, really have something that has kind of inspired them to reach out because maybe they're struggling with something, maybe they're feeling anxious, or maybe there's something that's a challenge that's made them feel like this might be supportive for me.
Mhm.
Others are feeling like, I want to thrive in this
Mhm.
time. I want to have some extra support. I want to have a coach. I want to work with a coach and a counselor, and I really want to
Like
um
preventive health.
preventative health. Yeah, so I feel like I'm on both sides of that, of like preventative health and kind of like how can I feel my best and thrive in this,
Mhm.
or I'm feeling some challenges and I how can I address them, how can, so it's kind of from that survive to thrive kind of range. And and then others who also in pregnancy who maybe had a challenging experience the first time, or they had their first experience and were like, not what I thought it was going to be. I
Mhm.
think I could work with somebody to deal with some of the, things that weren't what I expected, or maybe some of the other feelings that are coming up for me, or wow, maybe they had an unexpected cesarean birth, or they had a vaginal birth, but maybe they transferred to the hospital, or maybe they had a home birth, but there was still aspects that need to be processed through. And so sometimes that's with people who are pregnant again. Sometimes it kind of all comes up and they're like, wow, I need to deal with that. Other people, it's in either within weeks or months or really years after they've, had their baby or babies.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of like the different, some people are coming for that birth processing and birth trauma work, and others are in their postpartum period and are like, maybe there's some kind of postpartum mood disorder, or they're kind of, postpartum depletion, or are even past that point and are like, who am I, how do I work through this next phase of parenting? And so it can look really different depending on when somebody comes in. Once we're working together, there's actually a similarity, because it's the same sort of themes of like, what's going on physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally, logistically, how can we make this all be a humming working vehicle so you can thrive, and you can be set up for success wherever you are in your journey. um
If somebody's
so yeah.
diagnosed or feels they, have
Mhm.
postpartum depression or anxiety or rage or anything like that, is that something that you feel like you could be really supportive of? Is it something that they also should see another professional in
That's a
addition
great
to
question.
you,
Yeah.
or is just you
It
fine?
really depends case by case. There are definitely a lot of people who I am working with and supporting them, and they're dealing with postpartum mood disorders. And I am trained, I'm familiar, I'm comfortable, I'm experienced, and I'm able to really support people. If it's something that like they're going to need medication, they maybe need a psychiatric evaluation. If it is something that feels like, oh, this person needs more support, then I'm always going to advocate for them to have whatever other support that they need, whether it's their doctor, their OBGYN, a psychiatrist, you know, a, a licensed marriage and family therapist who might be able to support them in a different way. So I do not shy away, because it's so prevalent, it's so important, and it really shows up in different ways. And so if somebody, but I'm always paying attention of like, is this something that this person's going to need some more support in order to really help them kind of pull out of whatever it is. But yeah, I'm very familiar and work quite a bit with how all the different manifestations of what that looks like, kind of in the both perinatal and postpartum, even during pregnancy as well. So yeah, it's a really good question. People are becoming more and more aware of postpartum depression, and are kind of, I always think it's interesting that people almost even bring those words together. They associate postpartum as meaning postpartum depression, but really it's just like, postpartum is just the period after you've had your baby.
Yes, it has a negative connotation to it now.
It does. People even use it, the short word for it of like, oh, I have postpartum. And I'm like,
yes.
Okay, interesting, to see how that has evolved. In some ways, it's not a terrible thing in that it's bringing more awareness to the fact that that's an issue, and there needs to be more support for moms in that transition, and also to recognize that like there's a certain amount that's actually normal. There's a certain amount of that transition and that postpartum like period, and what that looks like as within a realm of normal. Of like you might find yourself sitting in the bathtub crying, like a week after you had your baby, and it doesn't mean you have postpartum depression. And that there is, that it's not the same thing as like the baby blues, or what that is. But also it can take so many different forms that people do not recognize, where there can be, like you mentioned, postpartum rage, postpartum anxiety, and people will miss that more frequently because they're just looking for the depression piece. And if it doesn't match that, then they don't recognize that, oh, this might actually be something else going on. And the way that I hold that is actually looking from this holistic perspective of like, what are the different factors that are coming in to influence what someone's experiencing? How much sleep are they getting physiologically? What's going on? It's kind of like relationally, circumstantially, what's happening, and what are all the different ways hormonally? Yeah, like what are all the different ways to support that?
Yeah, I had 3 days of postpartum depression after I night weaned my daughter. But I didn't like put the two together, because when you're in it, you can't recognize it. And I was in therapy, like already just processing my experiences. And I was like getting massage work done and chiropractor and doing yoga, going on hikes, like all these things already were in my like self-care. And then I remember the first hard day, and my husband, I love him, but I remember him being like, oh, I guess that massage didn't really help much. and I remember being so angry, and then being like, oh my God, he's right. Like I'm already doing all the things. And that was when I started to panic, because on day 2, when it was still happening, I was like, there's nothing left to add. Like I'm not the person that doesn't have support. I'm not the person who like isn't hanging out with their friends, is just isolated at home with the kids. Like I was like, I'm already feel like I'm doing everything. And then when day 3 hit, I was like, it's forever. This is like what I'm gonna feel like now. And I would just like sit on the couch and cry. And I can't even remember. My daughter must have been like 2 years old or something, maybe less than that. Like she was talking enough, or maybe it was my son who said it to me. I remember one of them said to me like, it's okay, mommy, Moana cries too.
Oh, well, sweetheart.
She turned out okay in the end.
Yeah. And she's a hero.
Yeah.
She is a badass hero that's gonna save everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how did that end up lifting? You said it lasted 3 days. What happened after the third day?
Um, on the third day, when I had this like, oh my gosh, this could be forever, and I'm already doing all the things, I basically used Facebook as my diary, which I do. I'm a pretty public
Mhm.
person. And I just like, I wouldn't say like blogged it, but I just like wrote out everything I was feeling, like,
Mhm.
that I'm doing all the things to support myself, like, and it just like came out of nowhere, but I like recognized by day 3 what I'm in. And
Yeah.
just to like, one, because I knew so many people would be able to relate to it, because anytime I post something vulnerable like that, everyone is like, me too,
Yeah.
and I knew it was like a way of just like getting it off my chest. And so I don't know if, go back and not do that and see if it would have continued. I don't know, but then
Yeah.
it's gone. And I
Yeah.
remember bringing it up to my therapist, and she was just like, anytime that happens again, call me right away, and it never
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
And I didn't know at the time. It wasn't until like maybe a year or two later that somebody mentioned like hormonal fluctuations with weaning. And I was like, oh, that was it. Cause I was still nursing her, but I had night weaned. And I was
I
like,
see it a lot.
yeah.
I see that hormonal fluctuation during the weaning process a lot.
And if I
Yeah.
had somebody say that to me,
Mhm.
I think it really could have helped sooner to like give it
Yeah.
a diagnosis, I guess, or like give it a term,
Yeah.
so I could be like, oh, that's what that is. I'm not just like
Totally.
falling apart. Like this is a thing and it'll pass. And
Absolutely. It kind of gives it a perspective. I feel like it's a similar thing for even sort of like a monthly PMS sort of
yeah,
cycle. That it doesn't mean you're not going to go through the hormonal fluctuation, and you might not go through the turmoil, either mental or emotional struggle. But I can speak for myself that it's like when I got to the point where I was like, oh, day 22, here I am, where I'm like, why are my kids touching me so much? It's that one day. It's like, why is everybody touching me so much? And then I look at my calendar and I'm like, it's because it's day 22. And
yeah,
all of a sudden it feels different, it's a
yeah,
little more, it's a little bit much, and so so it doesn't mean I don't feel that, but then I can be like, oh, I don't have to take this as seriously. I
mm-hmm,
don't have to take this as
yes,
personally
that's
and
it.
think this is forever, or think that this is something that's bigger and more meaning making
Mm-hmm,
than what it is,
yeah,
that and not to disregard what it is, but also to be able to be like, oh, I can hold this within the context that it is, how this is affecting me.
yeah, yeah.
So
We had a small little mommy's group, and online and in person. And whenever I would go on and just like everything was falling apart, and I was telling all my girlfriends, there was one girlfriend who was always like, where are you on your cycle? And I would like
uh-huh.
pull up my little app and I'm like, oh, I bleed tomorrow or whenever. And she was like, and I was like, thank you. But it was like
Yeah.
almost monthly where I would go online and do this, and she would have to like be the words, because I'm
She's
like,
all, I'm tracking. It's day
exactly.
27, honey.
Exactly. I was like, could you just give me a heads up the day before or something? That would be really nice.
I
Yeah. But I
know.
think like voicing it too, like just takes the power away. Today,
Absolutely.
I messaged my husband and I was like, super emotional today. Like everything is falling apart, and it wasn't yesterday, and nothing has changed. So I know it's hormonal. Like I know it isn't
Mhm.
actually all falling apart.
Mhm.
Um, but like I just wanted you to know. And so he was like, let me just bring dinner home, make it easy tonight. So it was like great
Aw.
to be able to just like voice it,
I
be
love him. I
heard.
don't even know him, and I love him. I'm like, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And it's just like, okay, thank you for hearing me and like
Yeah.
helping out. And yeah,
Yeah.
and it makes the difference to be able to like recognize, okay, this is hormonal. I'm still feeling it,
Yeah.
and I will be better tomorrow. And again, not
Yeah.
everybody is as fast as mine, like it's not just a
Absolutely.
3-day thing, that's going to be
Yes.
better in a couple days.
Yeah. And that, I feel like, to me, that is where that preventative piece comes in,
Hmm.
of like, actually that is where that investment piece, in
Hmm.
order to support from the beginning as much as possible. And I see that even in the benefit of like the work that somebody does, the support that they put into place in pregnancy.
Hmm.
So then they can have, and I mean, this is if we're focusing on postpartum period, or the things that arise then, but it's like really is real, of like trying to set yourself up for success. And that doesn't mean you can avoid everything, but you can actually have resources in place to support you if things do arise, or if things do start to get really difficult and you maybe start to plummet, to not go so far
Hmm.
before having the support you need.
Hmm.
And I think that's really, really important. To get back to your question about closure,
Yes.
closure is so important.
Hmm.
And, it fits in a few ways of how I work with people. One is specifically around birth. I feel like having a closure process, whatever that looks like, is so powerful and so important. And it's not just if there's trauma. It's the truth is like I feel like our culture is really good at these sort of, the things before, like the celebration before, like the blessing way, or the baby shower, or the wedding shower, that kind of thing. And I feel like then the thing happens and there isn't something on the other side to kind of contain it,
Hmm.
and to mark it as like that chapter is now closed. And
Hmm.
it doesn't mean that chapter is not going to keep informing you
Hmm.
as you go, but to actually, I mean, it's maybe too graphic of a metaphor, but like I feel like very often people will have their baby shower, their blessing, and then they go through the pregnancy and then the birth, and then the birth just kind of continues to bleed forward in their life. And I feel like it's really powerful and important to actually have something on the other side of that, to mark like, uh, I've gone through that, to process it however it needs to be processed.
Hmm.
And that could be, it was exactly what I wanted, and it was profound, and it was intense. That even needs to be processed,
Hmm.
because more than likely it's probably the most intense, powerful, life-changing, profound experience somebody has ever had in their life, if it's in the positive. Like even in that circumstance, to have an opportunity to process, to make, meaning making, to sort of like, uh, let the course of the experience move through you, and um and to share it. I feel like that is why it's important to have like the birth story sharing, but also have the birth story sharing process in a way that like the person's who you're not sharing with a friend who's then going to say, oh yeah, I had that experience too, or like, oh well, this story I heard. It's like really with intention to be able to process and release whatever needs to be released. And so then you can actually come through to a place of peace, and I feel like, and I feel like the kind of closing piece of that can be done in a lot of different ways. I feel like the processing is important, and then the closure can be through a ceremony. It can be something like, a blessing. It can be with community. I have facilitated kind of closing the bones or birth closure ceremonies in kind of a setting that was like a blessing. It was, the woman who had delivered, and her closest friends, and wrapped her and held her in
That's
this
beautiful.
way.
I love
It
that.
was really beautiful, and it was a way to both in community, but also in her body and her spirit, kind of bring her all back together. And I feel like that is such an important part of, of that process and of the closure piece of like, can you bring all your, we crack open in so many ways when we're going through these major life-changing experiences. And I feel like birth, no matter what the birth looks like, whether it, like you're saying, whether it's a medicated or unmedicated or, vaginal or belly, or cesarean birth, like whatever that looks like, we need to have something on the other side to support kind of like, I went through that, and when you're ready to seal it in a sense, and we kind of crack open, but I don't think we break open, sometimes it can feel that way, but we kind of can come apart, and it's an opportunity. I feel like it can be a ceremonial process to bring our pieces back together, and to really feel like, okay, you might still be working with that for a while, that's going to be informing a person, in their parenthood and in their life, but to not feel like it's just dangling and the pieces are dangling out there can be really, really helpful.
So if I was working with you in my pregnancy and I wanted, regardless of my experience, I wanted a closing ceremony, what would that look like, or your recommendation? Is it, obviously there's no like wrong time to have it or like a too late time, of course, but like if it was like planned where I want to do this and we're planning in my pregnancy, like when would you suggest it? Like 6
Good question.
weeks later
I've done it I've done it with someone before. I want to say it was about 2 weeks after, and that was because she had a really difficult labor, and her nervous system had not recollected itself. And in that situation, I felt like this is what she needs in order to bring her back and kind of ground her back in, and deal with kind of the trauma that was still running through her system. And it absolutely shifted things for her at that 2-week mark. Other people, it might be like you're saying 6 weeks. I've quite frequently I've done 40 days, and it's kind of like they've gone through this postpartum initial period, and then that was like a closing, a sealing of that part. And then it's kind of like whenever it feels right for somebody. I've done it with people on their child's 7th birthday, and it was like, now's the time. I need to do that now. That's still present for me. Over time, I have become more and more clear that it is helpful to, if there is trauma, not everyone has trauma, but if there is, it's really helpful to address that as much as possible before doing the closure. Because I feel like, you don't, if it is as part of the trauma healing, just initially, that's different. It's kind of serving a different purpose. But if it is actually to mark symbolically and kind of for their whole process, a closure of that chapter, I feel like it's good to have dealt with more of what's there for someone before doing that. If they actually have a lot of grief, or if they have fear, or if they have sadness, or if they have a sense of like, that wasn't what I expected, to be able to process that, so they're not just like, I'm just going to try to close that all up.
Right.
I feel like,
let's just be done with this.
Yeah. I feel like then it could be trying to bypass.
Yeah. So
and it's,
you hadn't worked with someone prenatally, and somebody's coming to you postpartum and they're saying, I need some closure. what
Yeah.
is, do you, just like an average, are people usually seeing you for a couple months before the closure takes
Yeah.
place, or is it like a couple appointments? I mean, I know it's kind of
Yeah,
different
it
depending, but
really it varies. And I'm actually quite, like I said, it doesn't look the same with anyone. It can be really it varies, and that's because there might be someone who's like, I really am just interested in doing this closure. And then I'll assess and I'll try,
right,
we'll
yeah.
do, I offer a complimentary consultation. So we'll, usually we'll do that. And then, sometimes it's like we do 3 sessions, 3 private sessions, working with whatever might be needing to be worked through, and then they're ready, or they want to do that, and that's what it is.
Mhm.
Others, it might be, I've worked with some people where it's like we did the birth work and kind of the trauma clearing and kind of processing and healing work for a number of months,
Mhm.
and then they want to do the closure. Other people, they don't actually do the closure ceremony. Other people, it's just they feel like, oh, I feel complete. Like I feel better. I feel myself again. Like I feel at peace. I feel whole. I feel intact.
Mhm.
And then it might be that like that feels good, and that more of the that private kind of like coaching, counseling, healing work that we've done is what offers that closure, and it isn't necessarily like a standalone kind of ceremony at the end. And I at this point I honestly would be more hesitant to just do a ceremony sight
Mhm.
unseen. I have done that. I've done that in the past. I feel like more and more as time has gone on, I feel like I see the deep benefits of doing the other work in with somebody, with to enhance that and make that actually as effective as possible. And in some of those cases, it's been like we've done a session, and then they're feeling like they want to do it after that. Also, if someone comes to me and they say like, I've done all this work, like I've done this work and I feel like, I've done therapy and, I've been doing this healing process, and now I'm looking for this next level of it.
Mhm.
It will be case by case. And other people, I've done, they came to me with birth trauma. We started doing that work. We've, done however much that required for us to be focused on that. And then very often the work evolves, and then it actually morphs into supporting through postpartum, and then supporting through parenthood. And then very often it's like, then we've established this sort of coaching, counseling, relationship that, there's some who I started with, when they're right after their baby was born or within the year of their baby being born, and now their child is 5, and we still meet together every other week,
Yeah.
as being kind of the anchor through, for their support system and their healing and their growth and their, sort of counseling, coaching anchor for that. Um
Because then
and
the
sometimes
real hard stuff happens. You actually have to parent someone. Like, you thought birth is hard,
yeah.
raising kids is way harder.
Shh.
And it
No, just
lasts
joking,
longer.
just joking. Yeah. Yeah, but it evolves, it keeps
Yeah.
changing.
Yes.
That's the beautiful thing, is that I feel like, I mean, I at this point it's interesting, I have more and more people in my practice that are like in their first year after having their baby, and they aren't necessarily working um with birth stuff at all. They're just trying to manage life and stress and parenthood, and maybe being a professional and finding their balance of identity as they are moving forward in life. And especially right now during this pandemic, there's such a need for support of moms who are isolated and are under stress and are stuck at home with their kids,
Mhm.
and are even like trying to work at home with their
Mhm.
kids
And school their children.
and school their children. So to be able to support that, I feel like that has definitely become a larger part of the population that I'm working with. And I work with people, I mean, we're both, you know, lucky to know each other and be in Sonoma County, but I do work with people all over all over the country.
I was going to say, which,
Yeah,
kind of the big blessing of the COVID situation and everything going to online, because people are recognizing, wow, I can work with so many different people, not just whoever's local to me. Uh,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. Are
yeah.
you still doing like closing ceremonies, even though they're not in person right now? Or is that kind of like, it really needs to be in person?
The ceremony, the actual birth closing ceremony includes a closing the bones.
Mm,
And so to me,
yeah.
it really does need to be in person
Yeah.
in order to do that fully. I mean, I do hypnotherapy, I do matrix re-imprinting, which is kind of like, if I had to explain it, it's a sort of like, it's an advanced form of emotional freedom technique, EFT tapping, as if you were to take hypnotherapy and EFT and bring them together.
Mhm.
That's what matrix re-imprinting would be. And I feel like those can have a similar healing effect and bring a sense of closure that work just as well over Zoom. But I feel like, but I can't bind someone. I can't wrap them and rock them and soak them and go through, and to really, create that kind of ceremonial process that, looks different. Again, some people will have a fire, others will, like have it connect with the earth. It's like it is, again, kind of like depends on what the person brings and what they need it to look like, but it really does need to be more in person.
Well, as
So I look forward to
all this
when
is done, I want to be first
yeah.
in line.
All right.
It's so funny. I kept like leaning in and into what you were saying, and every once in a while I glance at myself. I'm like, oh my God, my head's huge compared to hers. And I kept having to lean back. I was just like, tell me more.
I
Oh, it
love
was
it.
so
I
great
love it.
chatting with you. I feel like we could just go like
We
do a
could,
part
we
two.
could. We absolutely could. We could. Well, I do want to say I think it is really beautiful and wonderful. I've told you this before, that you are including these other forms of care in um in your midwifery packages, and especially the continued care postpartum. I think you said that you're doing that for up to a year, right? That you'll still stay connected to somebody. And I find that so valuable. Just the more connections that a mom can have in that time, and people to turn to, and think people, even just to
Mhm.
normalize things that are challenging or hard. But as a new mom, you don't know that,
Yeah.
and to be like, is it I mean, like, I see very often where it's like, is it normal to have this kind of like scary thought? And it's like, oh yeah, like that, it doesn't mean you're going to act on it. Like, you don't even need to feel shame. Like, you need to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then there's so much, and then you can work with it. And if you are just isolated, you don't know that. And it can be really scary. So I feel like just any connection that people have through that transition that keeps them in community, keeps them resourced, is so important and so valuable. So I just want to give you that feedback, that I'm really glad that you are offering that as part of your midwifery care.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, I keep complaining about it, but like, what can I do to make it different? And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, we'll just start doing it, just like
Mhm.
start changing
Mhm.
it, and hopefully it'll catch on. And yeah. And I love every single time I refer someone to you, they come back and they're like, oh my gosh, even just that first session like changed everything. They're always
Yeah.
raving about you. And I really
Thank
appreciate you. I
you.
feel so lucky that you're
Thank
part of
you.
our community. And Yeah.
I appreciate it. I really do. Well, it's so nice to be able to connect with you this way. And yeah, maybe we'll get to do a part 2.
Yes, I think we will. All right. Talk again.
Okay. Take care. Have a good day. Good night.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks everybody for listening. You can find us at Born Wild Podcast on Instagram. For inquiries or feedback, you can email us at bornwildpodcast@gmail.com. You can find me, Emma Ray, on Instagram at Emma Ray, REA. Sophia at sophiabirth.com.
And me, Leah, at Bay Area Homebirth.
We would really appreciate it if you would rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps us reach more people. And as always, stay wild.